You could see the waves in the moonlight. That's how low we were. Colonel Robert Venkus said that about the night of April 14, 1986, somewhere over the Mediterranean, his F-111 Aardvark hugging the surface at 200 feet, doing 500 knots in the dark toward Muammar Gaddafi's compound in Tripoli. The terrain-following radar flew the jet. The crew held on. Every bump in the scope translated to a bump in the airframe. Automatic, violent, precise. At that altitude, at that speed, a software hiccup measured in milliseconds separated flight from a fireball on the water. 6 F-111Fs from the 48th Tactical Fighter Wing out of RAF Lakenheath drew the hardest target that night. Bab al-Azizia, Gaddafi's headquarters and personal residence, not a radar site, not a barracks on the outskirts. The compound sat in the middle of downtown Tripoli, ringed by SA-6 and SA-8 batteries, defended by crews the Soviets had trained personally. The bombers had to hit one building complex in the dark on the first pass without leveling the neighborhood around it. No other aircraft in the American inventory could do it, and the F-111 almost didn't exist to try. If you're still watching videos about jets like this, the ugly ones, the controversial ones, the ones that proved everybody wrong, then this channel runs on people like you. A like and a subscribe go further than you think. And if there's a mission or an airframe you want the full story on, drop it in the comments. General Dynamics rolled out the F-111 in 1964 to howls of derision. Robert McNamara's Pentagon had forced the Air Force and Navy into a joint fighter program, one airframe for both services, and the compromises satisfied nobody. The Navy hated it, called it too heavy for carrier ops, and eventually killed their version outright. The Air Force watched 3 F-111As crash during their first combat deployment to Vietnam in 1968, Combat Lancer, they called it, and lost a fourth to unknown causes. 4 jets deployed, 3 destroyed in weeks. The press called it a death trap, Congress called it a scandal, and McNamara's critics took it as proof that systems analysis couldn't build an airplane. The causes turned out to be a faulty horizontal stabilizer weld, fixed inside 6 months, but the reputation stuck for years. The reputation missed something. The F-111 carried a terrain-following radar system, the AN/APQ-110, later upgraded, that let it fly hands-off at 200 feet in zero visibility. No other tactical bomber on Earth could do that in 1968. By 1972, F-111s flying out of Tockley ran Operation Linebacker missions into North Vietnam at night, alone, without escorts, hitting targets that full strike packages of F-4s and F-105s needed dozens of support aircraft to reach in daylight. 4,200 sorties, 6 losses, a loss rate under 0.2%. The Soviet General Staff noticed. A declassified GRU assessment from 1974, translated and released by the Defense Intelligence Agency in 2003, described the F-111's low-level penetration capability as the most significant tactical threat to Warsaw Pact air defenses in Central Europe. Their word, significant, from a service not known for handing out compliments to American hardware. 14 years after that assessment, the jet McNamara forced into existence and half the Pentagon tried to cancel crossed the Libyan coastline at 200 feet at night to put laser-guided bombs through Gaddafi's front door. The mission covered 3,200 nautical miles each way because France refused overflight rights. 13 hours in the cockpit, the longest fighter combat mission in history. Nobody else volunteered for the job. Senator John McClellan banged his gavel in room 318 of the Russell Senate Office Building in February 1963 and opened what became the longest weapons procurement investigation in congressional history. 10 months of hearings, 400 witnesses. The question, why did McNamara's Office of the Secretary of Defense overrule the unanimous recommendation of a military evaluation board that favored Boeing's TFX design and hand the contract to General Dynamics instead? McClellan never got a clean answer. McNamara testified that the General Dynamics proposal offered greater commonality between the Air Force and Navy versions, 70% shared airframe, he claimed, versus Boeing's roughly 40%. The military board countered that Boeing's design performed better in every measurable category. The Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations published its findings in 1970. No criminal wrongdoing. But the report used language like arbitrary and capricious to describe the selection process. Their words. The Navy killed their F-111B variant by 1968. Too heavy, they said, and they had a point. The carrier version topped out around 77,000 pounds at maximum gross weight. The Grumman F-14 Tomcat that replaced it in the fleet defense role weighed 20,000 pounds less and carried the same Phoenix missiles the Navy actually wanted. The swing wing survived the transition from one jet to the other, which meant General Dynamics had pioneered a mechanism that its competitor ended up perfecting. That stung. Vietnam made it worse. Combat Lancer put 6 F-111As into Thailand in March 1968. 2 went down within the first week. A third crashed on the 22nd. The Air Force pulled the remaining jets out of theater after 55 sorties. We sent them over there before they were ready, Major General Charles Grubb told investigators. He commanded the 474th Tactical Fighter Wing at Nellis. He'd opposed the early deployment. Nobody listened. The stabilizer fix solved the structural failure, but the damage to the program played out in budget rooms, not hangars. Congress cut F-111 procurement from over 1,500 airframes to 563. Unit costs ballooned from $3.7 million in 1963 to roughly $15 million by final delivery, a figure critics quoted without adjusting for inflation or the reduced production run, which accounted for most of the increase. Meanwhile, the PAVE TAC targeting pod went into development at Ford Aerospace, forward-looking infrared, laser designator, integrated with the F-111F's attack radar. The combination gave a 2-man crew the ability to find, identify, and strike a single building from 10 miles away, at night, at 200 feet. Nobody in Congress held hearings about that. What happens when your closest ally tells you no? France refused overflight rights on April 12, 2 days before the strike. President Mitterrand's office cited concerns about escalation. Spain followed. The straight-line route from England to Tripoli, 2,400 nautical miles over France and the western Mediterranean, died in a diplomatic phone call. The replacement route swung west out of Lakenheath, south through the Strait of Gibraltar, east across the length of the Mediterranean, 3,200 nautical miles each way. The F-111F carried enough fuel for maybe a third of that. So they built an airborne gas station. 28 KC-10 and KC-135 tankers launched ahead of the strike package. The bombers hit the first refueling track over the Bay of Biscay in total darkness, radio silent, running only the dim slipway lights on the tanker bellies. 4 more refueling brackets followed across the Mediterranean, each hookup at night over open water, in formation, with no margin for a missed contact. A crew that couldn't plug in on schedule dropped out. 2 F-111s aborted for equipment failures. A third lost its PAVE TAC pod. 18 bombers launched from Lakenheath. 15 made the target area. Captain Fernando Ribas Dominici and Captain Paul Lawrence flew Karma 52, the 5th jet in the Bab al-Azizia element. Ribas Dominici, 23 years old, from Puerto Rico. Lawrence, 31, from San Francisco. They'd trained for this profile for months. Low-level penetration against simulated Soviet-style integrated air defenses. The same mission the F-111 had rehearsed in Europe since the mid-70s. At 0200 local time on April 15th, the strike package crossed the Libyan coastline at 200 feet. The SA-6 batteries around Tripoli lit up. Tracers climbed in orange ropes from gun emplacements across the city. The crews could see the glow reflecting off their canopies, flickering against the instrument panels. Navy A-6 intruders and F/A-18 Hornets hit Benghazi simultaneously, splitting Libya's air defense network in half. Harm missiles from EF-111 Ravens suppressed the radar sites around Tripoli. The window lasted roughly 12 minutes. The Bab al-Azizia element rolled in at 540 knots. PAVE TAC pods swiveled, infrared images blooming on the weapons systems officers' screens, buildings, walls, a compound exactly matching the target photos. 4 jets dropped their GBU-10s. The 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs punched through the compound structures. Post-strike imagery confirmed direct hits on Gaddafi's headquarters building and an adjacent barracks. Karma 52 never pulled off target. The jet disappeared from formation somewhere over Tripoli. No radio call, no ejection signal, no beacon of any kind. The Libyans recovered wreckage, and both crew members' remains from the Gulf of Sidra days later. The cause has never been conclusively determined. Anti-aircraft fire is the most commonly cited explanation. A 1987 Air Force Accident Investigation Board reviewed the limited evidence and could not rule out a terrain-following radar malfunction at low altitude. The records don't resolve it. Rebus Dominici died at 2 a.m. local time, 6,300 miles from the base where he'd taken off 13 hours earlier. Lawrence died next to him. They remain the only American combat fatalities of Operation El Dorado Canyon. The mission profile worked exactly as designed. Colonel Sam Westbrook, the 48th TFW commander, told debriefers at Lakenheath. The airplane did what 20 years of people said it couldn't. He did not mention Karma 52 by name in that debrief. He didn't have to. Somewhere in the Kuwaiti desert, on the night of February 13, 1991, an Iraqi T-72 commander buttoned his hatch and waited inside a revetment his engineers had spent weeks digging. Sand berms on 3 sides, camouflage netting overhead. From 13,000 feet, through a paved tack pod's infrared eye, the tank's engine block glowed like a lit cigarette on a dark porch. The F-111F crews called it tank plucking. GBU-12. Paveway 2s, 500-pound laser-guided bombs, cheap and accurate, dropped 1 per pass, 1 per tank. The 48th TFW flew out of Taif, Saudi Arabia, and over 42 nights destroyed more Iraqi armor than any other coalition unit. The official count, 1,500 verified armored vehicle kills. Colonel Tom Lennon, the wing commander, reported his crews averaging better than 2 kills per sortie. Some nights, 4. The paved tack pod that nobody in Congress had noticed 15 years earlier turned the F-111F into the most efficient armor killer in theater, and it operated exclusively at night, when Iraqi air defenses went functionally blind. The numbers from Desert Storm read like an accountant's fantasy. 70 F-111Fs flew 2,500 sorties, not one lost to enemy action. Cost per kill ran lower than any other precision platform in the coalition. A 500-pound GBU, 12 cost around $8,000 in 1991 money. An Iraqi T-72 cost the Soviets roughly $1.5 million to build. The exchange rate favored the Aardvark. We ran out of tanks before we ran out of sorties. A weapons systems officer from the 493rd Tactical Fighter Squadron told Air Force oral historians in 1992. His name is redacted in the transcript. The interview runs 47 pages. He describes the infrared signatures of burning vehicles in clinical detail, the turret ring glowing first, then the ammunition cooking off in a white flash that saturated the pod's sensor for 3 to 4 seconds. 4 years later, the Air Force retired the F-111. The last operational Aardvark left Cannon Air Force Base in 1996. The official rationale cited airframe age and maintenance costs, 27.6 maintenance man-hours per flight hour, roughly double the F-15E Strike Eagle that partially replaced it. Fair enough. Old airframes cost money. But the Strike Eagle carried less payload, flew shorter range on internal fuel, and didn't match the F-111's low-level ride quality in turbulence. The variable sweep wing smoothed out the bumps that beat fixed-wing crews into exhaustion on long penetration runs. The Australians kept flying their F-111Cs until 2010. They couldn't find a replacement that matched the range. After El Dorado Canyon, Gaddafi spent billions on underground command bunkers and tunnel networks specifically hardened against precision-guided munitions delivered at low altitude. The Libyans restructured their entire air defense philosophy around defeating the kind of strike the F-111 had executed in 1986, low, fast, under the radar. SA-24 man-portable systems replaced older static batteries. Command nodes were dispersed, and everything that could be buried was buried. In 2011, NATO came back. The aircraft that hit Tripoli flew at 15,000 feet and launched GPS-guided standoff weapons from outside Libyan airspace. B-2s, Rafales, Eurofighter Typhoons, F-16s. No terrain following radar required. No 200-foot penetration. The low-level mission Gaddafi had spent 25 years defending against had become obsolete. Not because anyone defeated it, but because satellite guidance and stealth made it unnecessary. The F-111 that proved the concept had already been cut into scrap at Davis-Monthan. Gaddafi died in a drainage culvert outside Sirte on October 20, 2011, dragged out by rebels who tracked his convoy after a French Rafales pass overhead. Colonel Westbrook, asked years later whether the F-111 had gotten a fair deal, said, "The airplane did everything we ever asked it to. We just stopped asking."